Okay, we are live and it's 1 minute to 7. Hope there's lots of people out there viewing. We welcome you. This is a wonderful program we've got lined up tonight with Peter Kaestner. Am I saying that right?
That's right. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Who is a birder who has some 9,900 species seen, and he's going for 10,000. So, and he'll tell you about how he got his good start as a diplomat, working in different foreign service offices. And he will tell us all about some of the fantastic places that he has been and birds he has seen. So I would like to say welcome, Peter, and I will turn this over to you.
Thank you, Deborah. It's very nice to be talking to the Orange Audubon Society, even though I'm talking to my computer, so it's not quite as interactive as some forms of communication. But I hope that you all enjoy my talk, 0 to 9,900, a lifetime of birding. Just to sort of give you an idea of where I am, this is a screen grab from my eBird profile page, which anybody can look at. You can watch my progress. You can see I've been to 190 eBird countries and territories, and there's still a few places that are blobs of gray on the map, but pretty much filled in most of it. And then this is my the total that I brag about is 9943, which is according to the International Ornithological Congress list, the IOC list, and that's a different taxonomy than eBird uses. My eBird list is 142 birds fewer because they use a different taxonomy. Interestingly enough, sometime in the next 12 months, those two numbers may come together because there's a process by which the major world checklists are all being harmonized. This is not me. This is my brother, Hank. Hank is 8 years older than I am, a fabulous birder. He's one of the top 10 e-birders in the world. And if you look at that map behind him, you can see that he is a pretty well-traveled birder also. Hank had a long career as a spice buyer for McCormick Spice Company. And he was very happy. They tried to promote him out of the office several times, but he kept saying that he just wanted to buy spices. And the company was relatively happy, although they were not quite so understanding of why a talented guy like that would want to spend his career buying spices. But it turned out very well for him, and he saw lots and lots of birds. But it started for Hank when he was 10 years old. My maternal grandparents, the Reeds, worked for the Inter-American Development Bank. And in 1954, when Hank was 10 years old, he visited Nana and Big Dad in Mexico City when Hank was 10 years old. And he was walking through Chapultepec Park. I think he was looking for butterflies. And he noticed this brilliant red and black bird. And he said, wow, what a great bird. And he goes into a shop, a Sears store, he says, and in the Sears store is a bird book for sale that has a photograph of the vermilion flycatcher on the cover. And he immediately recognizes that as the bird that he saw. My grandparents bought him the book, and you can see he still has it. And there he is showing off his spark bird, the vermilion flycatcher. Now, when Hank was 10 years old, I was just 2. And this is a picture of me just 2 years later when I'm about 4 years old. You can see with the binoculars hanging almost down to my knees. And I adored my older brother, and I still do. And when Hank did something, I wanted to do it too as a little kid. And it started a long association that, in fact, just continued. Let's see, we're in November last month. oh no, we're in December. Last month in November, Hank and I spent 2 weeks in Acre in far western Brazil and had a wonderful time birding together. One of the interesting things about this picture is, I'm in the far left, little tiny kid, but you notice that Hank and I are looking at the same thing. The guy in the middle is a guy named Biff Forbush, who is a medical researcher at Yale, very, very smart guy. But obviously he doesn't have the birding thing quite down because he's looking in the wrong direction. One of the real important milestones in my life, apart from being around my older brother Hank when I was very, very young and learning so much from him, was an opportunity in 1967 and 68 school year to spend that year in New Delhi, India, as part of a U.S. Embassy family, a guy named Rogers Beasley, who took the birth control pill to India in 1967. His son, Battle, my friend, didn't want to go, and his father let him bring a friend along, me. So I spent a year in India. During that time, I saw about 155 birds, all but 10 of which were lifers for me. Next sort of milestone was Cornell University. I went there from 1971 to 76. And the intention of going to Cornell was to become an ornithologist, and ended up with a bachelor's degree in evolution, ecology, and systematics, and would have been a bird taxonomist. One of the great things about being at Cornell is I had the opportunity to be a teaching assistant for the ornithology course there. And it was a lot of fun. And during those days, back in the early 1970s, this book on the list by Ernest P. Edwards was published, a coded list of birds of the world. And it was the first time that anybody had put in one small, easily carried volume, and the book is like 2/3 of an inch thick. It's a tiny little book, all the birds of the world. And it had about 8,600 species. At that time, I decided that I was not going to be able to compete with the bird watchers that had lists of 3,000 and 4,000 birds, because they had time and money, two things that I did not have as a graduating student from Cornell University. So what I decided to do was to try to become the first person to see all the families of birds. That's one of the things that we taught in the ornithology course. I said that the book had 8,600 birds. Right now, the IOC list is 11,001 bird. And you can see a really good example of how this has changed. Please pardon my horrible graphics here, but you see the photo on the left is actually taken from that book, the coded book of birds of the world, that has 8,600 birds. And I'm looking at the genus Cytholopus, the tapaculos. In 1974, when that book was published, there were 12 Cytholopus tapaculos. By 2006, there are 38 Cytholopus tapaculos, and nowadays there are 49 Cytholopus tapaculos recognized by the IOC. Now, this is an extreme example, but it's an idea of just how you can go from 8,600 birds to 11,000 birds in my lifetime. When I graduated from Cornell University, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I was not sure that I wanted to become a scientist. And part of the reason is that I wasn't sure that I had the temperament to do the sort of tedious work of collecting data and measuring thousands of birds, or doing replicating experiments over and over to get them right. So one of the things that I did to sort of clarify my own mind is I joined the Peace Corps. And this is a photograph taken from an airplane of Nyankunde. And the area on the left, there's an open area, is part of a school. And dead in the middle of the picture is a large, tall tree. And my house is directly behind that large, tall tree, right in the center, adjacent to the school. I was a science teacher and really, really had a wonderful time. I enjoyed teaching there. The language of instruction was French, so I got to speak French fairly well. And it was really a wonderful experience. Knowing that I was going to Eastern Congo, or what was then called Zaire, Cornell University Laboratory of Ornithology lent me a professional sound recording outfit, including a Dan Gibson 20-inch parabolic microphone and a Nagra reel-to-reel recorder. And I was able to get lots and lots of recordings, including over 300 recordings that were new to the LNS collection, now called the Macaulay Library. And interestingly, I was in South Africa earlier this year with my wife, and we heard a woodland kingfisher calling, and I wanted to pull the recording of the kingfisher up on Merlin to demonstrate to my wife which of the birds that was calling in the background was the woodland kingfisher. And I saw that the recording of the woodland kingfisher was made by Peter Kaestner in 1976. So these recordings that were made so many years ago are still being used and still a part of the collection. One of the things that happened while I was in the Peace Corps is I saw my 1,000th bird. When I went in the Peace Corps, I had over 900 species. So it was relatively quickly to get this black-crowned waxbill as my 1,000th species. One of the things about being in Africa is that there's a lot of adventure. And one day during the school holidays and around Christmas time, we were able to hitchhike down to a national park south of Nyankundi, where we were working. And this national park is called Virunga. At Virunga Park, there was a small safari lodge. I was staying there, and they said, please don't leave the safari lodge. It's very dangerous. And out the back of the safari lodge was a trail that went down to this riparian gallery forest you can see behind the buffalo. And lots of local people were going down this trail. And I said, oh, heck, I mean, it can't be that bad. These people are all going down to the forest. So I decided to go out to the main road and walk down to the bridge over the river to be able to birdwatch in the tall trees there. As I was walking along, I noticed a male buffalo that was grazing on the side. And I decided that I would mind my own business and he would mind his own business. So I was just walking past him. When I got to the point where I was the closest to the buffalo, he all of a sudden stopped grazing, put his head up, and started pawing the earth, just like they do in the cartoons before the bull rushes the matador and creams him. So I froze immediately because they have relatively poor eyesight, and if I'm not moving, it's very hard for them to see me. And then after what seemed like an eternity, he put his head back down to eat, and I walked directly backwards towards up the hill towards the safari lodge, so that my body would not move vis-a-vis the background. So I walked directly away from him. And fortunately, I lived to tell the tale. One of the nice things about living in the Eastern Congo is the variety of habitats. The Ituri rainforest is there. Lake Albert, which has some wonderful dry country around it, is nearby. And the Ruwenzori Mountains are nearby. And this is I climbed the Ruwenzori Mountains twice. And this is from one of the trips up there. Now, I have to tell you a story. When I was younger, I used to like to date girls and had lots of interest in girls. But strangely enough, I tended to, for some reason, I seemed to always end up with better relationships with the girls' mothers than I did with the girls. I'm not quite sure how that worked, but anyway, one of the things that the women, the mothers would tell me as a way of patting me on the back or boosting my ego or whatever, is they told me that I looked like Robert Redford. So just remember that. At the end of my Peace Corps time, I was contacted by the gentleman who's the second to the right with the T-shirt. His name is Joel Abramson. He just passed away recently. And he was the director of Bird Bonanza Tours. And here I am leading a group from Bird Bonanza. The guy taking the photograph is one of the other clients. There were 5 clients. The guy standing, I'm on the far left. The guy standing to my right is Arnold Small, who at the time was the president of the American Birding Association. The guy next to him is Norm Chesterfield, who had the biggest world list at the time. Then Joel Abramson and, gosh, I've forgotten the other guy's name, Martin Edwards from Canada. And after the Peace Corps, I decided that what I really wanted to do was to live and work overseas like I had been doing in the Peace Corps, and that I would not become a scientist or a business person like my older brother, but that I would have a lifetime of service to the American public. So I became a consular officer, and this is the photograph of the consular section of the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi, India, where it was my first posting as an American diplomat. And being a consular officer means issuing visas, and these are the 1981 visa machines. They were much more primitive than the electronic things that we use today. But I would process as many as 350 visas a day in New Delhi. Now, while I was there, of course, I was doing a lot of birding. This is one of my favorite photographs from India. This is an anhinga. And one of the interesting things about anhingas is that they have a simultaneous molt of all their wing feathers. But interestingly, they do not molt their scapular feathers, which you can see coming off the back. And of course, their tail is still there. And you can see the bird's uropygial gland, the base of the tail, and also sort of interesting fluting on the, or sort of rippling on the tail feathers, which I have no idea what it's for. It's a wonderful bird and an interesting photograph. One of my absolute favorite birds in India is a jungle babbler. And one of the interesting things about them is that they are called in English, one of their sort of colloquial names is Seven Sisters. And the reason is that they're in groups of probably 5 to 10, and they just babble all the time, making noise. And the English thought that they sound like a bunch of young women sort of gabbling all the time. Well, in Hindi, the same birds are called Sat Bahai, and a Bahai is a brother. So in Hindi, they're called 7 brothers, and in English, we call them 7 sisters. So this is a jungle babbler. This particular day, the temperature was about 115 degrees. It's in the middle of the day, this bird goes out and decides to do some sunbathing. This is a white-throated kingfisher, a common bird in northern India. One of the interesting things about India is back in the early 80s, vultures were very, very common. You would see hundreds and hundreds of them. And in the last couple of decades, they've become critically endangered because of the use of a veterinarian analgesic called diclofenac. If you've ever had Voltaren, which is a spread that you can put on your sore joints and things, it's the same active ingredient, diclofenac. Diclofenac, if ingested by birds, kills them. And what happened is the Indians would see an old cow, and they can't kill the cow because it's sacred. But what they would do is they would juice them up with diclofenac to make them not suffer. And then once they died of natural causes, the vultures would come along, eat them, and die. Here's a picture of my brother Hank in Bharatpur. Hank has visited me in almost every of my foreign service assignments. So this was in early 1982. And interestingly, the guy on the right, our guide there at Bharatpur Sanctuary is a guy named Bolu Khan, who is still around, and last year got a Lifetime Achievement Medal from the Rajasthan Environment Ministry. Now, one of the things I had mentioned earlier that I was trying to see all the bird families of the world. And one of the families I needed to see, probably the most important one in India, was the ibisbill, Ibidorhynchidae. And back in those days, very little was known about the ibisbill. But there was a book published about when I was born, 1953, by Bates and Lothier in the Breeding Birds of Kashmir. And in that book, there is a photograph of the breeding grounds of the ibisbill in southeastern Kashmir. So that was the only gem that I had, the only information I had. So what I did is I went up to Kashmir to this river where Bates and Lothier had found the bird. I think it was probably in the 1930s or 1940s. So I went up over the Labor Day weekend, and the hike to get there was approximately 40 kilometers or 25 miles. And it went over a 12,000 foot pass. So you start at about 7,000 feet, you walk up a mile, and then down a gentle slope, another 25 miles or 24 miles to get to the river. And I had to go up one day and then back the next day. But when I got there at the end of this long, long hike, I was standing on a little bluff, and I suddenly realized that the perspective that I had was the exact same perspective as the photograph of the breeding habitat of the ibisbill that was in the book, that Bates and Lothier had stood at that exact same spot and taken a photograph, because this is where the ibisbill lives. And darned if there wasn't an ibisbill sitting right in front of me. Unfortunately, it's late in the evening, and it's a horrible photograph, but it was a really remarkable experience to walk that far and such a difficult trip, and just have this miracle that just through sheer luck, that the trail that I took ended up being the exact same place where these guys had found the bird some 50 years earlier. One of the fun things about working in the embassy, most of the days were pretty tedious processing visas. But one day the ambassador said that the secretary of the Smithsonian, Dillon Ripley, was going to be visiting New Delhi, and asked if I would take him out bird watching for the day. So I got to take him out. He's the tall guy, and the short guy is a very famous Indian ornithologist named Salim Ali, and he's sort of the John James Audubon and Roger Troy Peterson all combined. He's a really amazing guy, really, really fun, and had a great time taking them out. I was even able to find Salim Ali a life bird. We found a flock of sociable lapwings, which he had never seen before. Now, I want to give you just a little bit of an idea. I'll tell you about the serendipity of finding the ibisbill. This was one of the books that I used a lot of. And this book has, I think, 150 or so different chapters, and each one has information about where you can see birds. And then it also has a species list of what birds you can see there. And I found that very, very useful when I was overseas, because back in those days, there was no internet. There were very, very few local guides. There were very few books. So having this book, Finding Birds Around the World, was really quite wonderful. Now, 1986, in July, I heard through the grapevine. I'm not quite sure what grapevine it was, but somehow I heard that Joel Abramson was going to find the last of the 159 recognized bird families in October. And I knew that Joel was trying to do the families because when I was leading him in Zaire in 1978, he would, whenever he saw a unique African family, he would get the other clients to sign an affidavit that he had seen that family. So he had been corresponding with the Guinness Book of Records for some time, for I don't know, almost a decade, I guess, at that point. And sort of planning to get into the Guinness Book of Records by seeing all the bird families. So knowing that he was going out in October to Madagascar to look for the ground rollers, he'd been there twice before and missed them. I made a sprint to get the last 4 of the families. The first one was the Baliniceps, or well-headed stork, in Rwanda. And then I needed 3 South American birds. I needed the sharpbill and trumpeter, which I saw in Suriname. And then I had sent a letter to Bob Ridgely, who's a very famous and well-known South ornithologist that specializes in South American birds and conservationist now. He gave me some information on where to look for the bird in Iguazu Falls, Argentina. So I flew to Iguazu Falls, and I went out in the afternoon to find out where this place was. And while I was out there, I saw some very fresh jaguar tracks. So instead of going out at the crack of dawn the next morning, I arranged for a car to drive me out there so I wouldn't get eaten by the jaguar. So I got to the place, played a tape of the bird, and it popped right up, and I got my 159th family of birds of the world. And fortunately, this happened this was 1986, and by 1989, I actually showed up in the Guinness Book of Records. And the reason my photograph is there is because of the birds that are flying around me, obviously. And the way that we did that is my father took the picture on the beach at Fort Lauderdale, and my wife, Kimberly, was on all fours behind me, throwing bread up in the air and attracting the ring-billed gulls to come and fly over my head. So that's how they got the picture. This is a picture of my wife. We met in December. Actually, yesterday was our anniversary, December 20th, 1986. We got married in July of 1987, and we're still together. This picture was taken shortly after we met in Lake Tahoe. And one of the things, my wife is not a birder, but she loves animals and she loves wildlife. And this is a photograph that was taken during her bachelorette party, where they went up to Mayo, Michigan. Kimberly is from Michigan, and we were married in Southeast Michigan. So she went up to Mayo with her girlfriends for the bachelorette party and saw a Kirtland's warbler. So when it came time for the wedding, I flew out to Michigan, and my brother Hank, of course, was there. And we decided that what we could do is leave at 3 in the morning of my wedding day, drive up to northern Michigan, get the Kirtland's warbler, and be back by noon, and have plenty of time before the wedding at 4 o'clock. Unfortunately, Kimberly didn't think that was a good idea, and it's the only time in our relationship that she has told me not to go bird watching. But anyway, the reason for this photograph is the animal that I'm holding, Kirtland, was named after Kirtland's warbler, so that he would be a constant reminder that my wife had gripped me off and had seen the Kirtland's warbler, and I did not have it on my list. Kirtland is an indoor cat, so he's being held very tightly until I can take him back inside. One of the wonderful things that happened in Bogota, that last photograph is from Bogota, Colombia. After we got married in 87, the next year, 1988, we moved to Bogota and were there for 2 years until 1990. In October of 1989, I was working. I went on a weekend down to see some American missionaries that were having some security concerns. And I wanted to go down and show the flag and try to understand their concerns and assist them in any way that I could. On the way back, I stopped off and did some birding on a roadside near the town of Monte Redondo. And in this spot right here, I discovered a new species of bird. And this is a terrible photograph. This is the actual type specimen that was trapped by Gary Stiles, an American ornithologist, in May of 1990. May of 1990. I discovered the bird in October of 89. We went out and set up some mist nets and caught a bird which became the type specimen. At the time, it was fairly common in this area. There were sort of a maximum number of singing territories along the road. I went back in 2 years ago now, almost 2 years ago, and the area where I discovered the bird is completely denuded. It's all pasture now, and the bird is critically endangered. Another thing that happened about that time is my eldest daughter, Katie, the redhead, was born in Bogota, and in fact, when we came back to Bogota with the type specimen of the new species, my wife was breastfeeding Katie, and I dropped the bird down next to this weeks-old infant. And my wife, realizing that birds are covered with parasites and the parasites leave the birds when they die, didn't think that was a very wise thing to do. We left Bogota and went to Malaysia, and here my brother Hank is visiting again. Another one of my early assignments from 1996 to 1999 was Windhoek, Namibia. Here the family is visiting some Himba tribesmen in northwestern part of Namibia. One of the things that happens when you're a diplomat is you get to meet all kinds of people. I've met presidents and kings and queens, and even the king of pop. Michael Jackson came to visit Namibia. It's a long story, but you can see I have expressing a little bit of concern that he has his hands on my daughters. One of the things that Namibia is known for is has wonderful birding, and Africa in general is a great destination, and India has a lot of endemic species. This is not endemic, but it is a characteristic bird of southern Africa. It's the southern yellow-billed hornbill. From Namibia in 1999, we went to Guatemala. And one of the interesting things about Guatemala are the active volcanoes. This is the Pacaya volcano, and you're allowed to climb right up to the top. And this is, a group from the embassy went up. This is our USAID director, Paul Wellham, who is standing on top of this active volcano. It's really quite remarkable. Now, let's see, while I was in Guatemala, I had an opportunity to do a temporary assignment in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia for 6 weeks. It was wonderful. I got a ton of birds. Every weekend I went out birding. And on my way home, I was flying from Frankfurt to Atlanta on Delta Flight 15 on 9/11/2001. And as we were flying across the Atlantic, I noticed that instead of turning sort of gently to the left and to the south as we went across the great circle route, that we suddenly made a right turn. And the pilot said that they had an indicator problem and they had to land, which of course was a lie. And when we landed, we noticed that there were almost 30 jumbo jets on the ground at Gander, Newfoundland. And these airplanes had all been grounded because the United States closed its airspace after the terrorist attacks of 9/11. After a full day of sitting in the plane, we were taken off in buses, and there were some, I think, 4,000 people that were dropped out of the sky, and the Delta 15 people were brought to a tiny town called Lewisport, and most of us were housed in the church at Lewisport, and the others were housed in people's homes. 3 times a day, the ladies from Lewisport came out and fed us all. And at the end of the trip, we got back on the plane after 3 days. This lady, Shirley Jones, decided to take not an offering, a collection of money to give to the people that had been so wonderful and so accommodating to us. And this lady turns out to be a professional, what's it called? The person that gets money for nonprofit organizations.
Fundraiser.
Yeah, and she has grown this donation list into a $2 million endowment, and they have put hundreds. I get emotional when I say this. Hundreds of people from this community have gotten advanced training and vocational training based on this fantastic opportunity. It's really, really amazing. And another neat thing that happened is that there is a Broadway musical called Come From Away, and there's a touring group that's going around, and you can go online and find out where they're going to be. I'm pretty sure they're coming to Florida, and the musical is a fabulous musical. It has gotten several awards. It's really the first time I went to it. I went with some people who had obviously not been there as I had been, and I was a little apprehensive. But it is such a great musical. Everybody loved it, and it is very emotional for people who actually experience the hospitality and the love from the people in that remote community. Okay, after Guatemala, I went to Brasilia, and I had an opportunity to go on a trip from Cape Town to Antarctica. Don't ever go to Antarctica from Cape Town. It's a 7-day trip. If you go across a Drake Passage, yes, there's a lot of waves, but it's only 2 days. 7 days is a long trip. So we had a 3-week trip. We went to Marion Island, which is part of South Africa, and got a couple of great endemic birds there. And then we went from there all the way down to Antarctica. And one of the interesting things about it is that the trip cost a little over $2,000 for a 3-week trip to Antarctica. Nowadays, a 3-week trip to Antarctica costs you closer to $20,000. But it was it was not a cruise ship, as you can see. It's just a working ship, and it was just fine. We had a great time. Anyway, this is Antarctic petrels taken down in the sea ice down in the very southern part. This is kind of a terrible picture, but it's a long way away. One day, everybody on board was eating breakfast. I was the only one who was out looking for birds, and I spotted this thing. And this is a emperor penguin. And the reason you can tell an emperor penguin is it floats much higher in the water than a king penguin. King penguins, when they're in the water, you can just see a little bit of their back. But the emperor penguins are much more floataceous, I guess. They float much, much higher in the water. I'm losing my computer here. It's not cooperating. It's falling off. There we go. So anyway, I ran downstairs and got everybody out, and we ended up seeing the bird pretty well. It came up and jumped up on a floe, and we got nice pictures of it. On the way back, on the 7-day trip back to Cape Town, I decided unilaterally and without any ornithological knowledge that we were going to see Atlantic petrels. And sort of like the emperor penguin, I was the only person who was looking for Atlantic petrels, and every day I would go looking for Atlantic petrels. And it became quite a joke because everybody thought I was a little daft to be looking for Atlantic petrels. There was no reason that anybody would have expected them. And this guy holding up the stick was an artist and painted a life-size, very accurate, very nice picture of or painting of an Atlantic petrel, put it on a stick, and went down the poop deck and then stuck it up as a joke that I would see it. And anyway, We did see Atlantic petrels. We saw about a dozen of them eventually before the trip was over. So I had the last laugh. Let's see, from Guatemala, Brazil. We went to Cairo, Egypt. Interesting sort of place. This is a scrub warbler from Cairo. This is a particularly lousy picture. This is a bird that everybody sees in Spain called Dupont's lark, but there's a very rare race of it that's found in the northern part of Africa. This picture was taken in northwest Egypt, and for a long time it was the only photograph of the race of this bird. And it's been published several times in several books on Palearctic birds because it's the only picture. This is a resort in the Sinai. Our family went to resorts quite frequently in the Sinai. And an amazing thing is during migration, these rare birds, this is a corncrake, which is usually an impossible bird to see, an endangered species in Europe that lives in tall grass. They're just walking around on the lawn of the resorts. One of the trips that I took from Cairo was a weekend trip to Syria. I just flew to Syria, rented a car. This is Palmyra. These ancient ruins were destroyed by ISIS some years ago, unfortunately. And I was looking for bird number 8,000. So this is a CC partridge, which was bird number 8,000 in Syria. So from there, from Egypt, I went back to New Delhi and had a wonderful time. I had a very important position. I was in charge of all visa operations in the entire country, and there are very few people, apart from the ambassador, that are more important in the bilateral relationship. So when I got there, I had a big press conference. We had all sorts of radio and television, as they all wanted to know what I was going to do issuing visas. Here's a picture of my family. They've all grown up. This was taken by my brother Reed at Pushkar Camel Fair. This is a bird that was unknown when I lived in India in the 1980s. It was only rediscovered in the early 2000s, a couple of years before I got there. This is a forest owlet. And this delightful photograph is the first photograph in the wild of a pheasant called the Western Tragopan. Now, they're beautiful pictures of it because real bird photographers have been able to get it. My camera happened to malfunction when the bird showed up, unfortunately, so that's the best I could do. One of my responsibilities in India was the country of Bhutan. And here I am meeting with the various members of the foreign ministry and that are responsible for North American affairs. One of the nice things about it, they knew when I got there, they knew that I was a birder. So the government of Bhutan arranged for a local birder to take me out and show me a couple of birds. And I actually got a couple of lifers, including this endangered white-bellied heron. One of the other things I did in India, my wife was off in Michigan at one point, so I took my daughters up to Western Tibet. And here we are crossing a pass. So this is the low spot on the road. I mean, a high low spot, but a mountain pass at 7,562 feet. We ended up camping at about 5,000 feet, and both of my daughters got altitude sickness at night. And the next morning we had to hightail it back down to lower altitude. One of the reasons I wanted to go up there was to get the black-necked crane. This bird is about 3 miles away. Got a little better view of the Tibetan sand grouse, which is another of my target birds there. This is a photograph, again, Hank visiting in, this would have been spring of 2009, I think. And the guy on the far left is John Hornbuckle, who at the time was the #1 or #2 world birder. And one of the birds that we saw there were the greater adjutant storks. I always kind of sort of, these two pictures sort of in some ways. Adjutant stork is a critically endangered bird, but they are very common and very easy to see at the Guwahati, Assam garbage dump, where they walk around among the people and among the cows. I was talking before about meeting important people. We had a problem with the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama sent Buddhist monks to the United States on special kinds of visas called an R visa, or religious worker visa. And religious worker visas tend to be easy to get. And I have a very firm commitment to the separation of church and state. And I was very liberal in issuing religious worker visas. We issued a lot of them. And one of the problems is that sometimes religious workers get into trouble. They do things they're not supposed to. And we'd gotten the word back from the Immigration Service that some of the Dalai Lama's monks were not doing what they were supposed to do. So I told this to the Dalai Lama's ambassador in New Delhi, and he passed it on to His Holiness. And I learned that His Holiness wanted to meet me to apologize in person for the misbehavior of his monks. Because ultimately, if the monks were misbehaving, then we wouldn't be giving them visas. So it was really important for him to sort this out and make sure that they were, because otherwise we wouldn't be giving visas to them. Anyway, I waited until my daughter, Katie on the left, the red hair, came back from college, and we met His Holiness at his hotel suite at the New Delhi airport when he was in transit. We spent a full 45 minutes with him and an interpreter, his ambassador in New Delhi, just the 6 of us. And it was an absolute magical time. It was really, you can see the smiles, really, really amazing guy. All right, that was 2009. I went back to Washington for a while, and I had an opportunity to go to Afghanistan. This is in 2000, this is December of 2012. And one of the things I did was, in preparation to go to Afghanistan, was a civilian military training program in Indiana, which is really neat. We had Afghan refugees or real Afghan citizens that worked as the interlocutors. So we would go in, and we would be transported just like we were going to be transported in Afghanistan by the US military in helicopters and Humvees. And then we would go and pretend that we were negotiating with the Afghans, and they were real Afghans. So we learned a lot of cultural things. We learned how to do business in Afghanistan, and we learned how to work with the US military. So it was a wonderful time. And we met some really great Afghan instructors that were part of the process. So in May of 2013, I went to Mazar-e-Sharif, Afghanistan, which is in the far north. This is their famous blue mosque there. This is me and my security detail in Mazar-e-Sharif. I'm the guy in the middle. The 2 guys without weapons on either side, one in the blue shirt on the right and a guy in a brown shirt or a greenish shirt on the left, are both State Department regional security officers. The rest of them are all hired security personnel, almost all of them ex-US Special Forces types. Wonderful, wonderful guys, very, very professional, did a really, really super job. And of course, while I was on base, I birded whenever I could. I was not able to ever go off of the base for birding. I went off many times for official business, and sometimes I was able to, spot something out the window of the car, or if we were visiting an agricultural place, sometimes there would be birds around, but never once even asked to go birding off of the base. So as a result, a lot of the bird pictures I have that are on concertina wire or otherwise. This is the first bird was a Spanish sparrow. This is a rosy pastor, or rosy starling, fantastic bird that came through it by the thousands in the spring, all in beautiful breeding plumage, singing all over the place. and then they disappeared. They breed up a little farther north in Afghanistan. So after my year in Afghanistan, I got a plum assignment in Frankfurt, Germany. Kimberly had retired. Kimberly, my wife, didn't mention this earlier. She also worked for the State Department as a diplomatic specialist, information technology specialist. And she retired in 2013 and then, or 14, and we went to 2 years in Frankfurt, a wonderful time. Kimberly got to play and go bicycle riding. And while I was there, I ran into the managing editor of the Frankfurter Rudesheim newspaper, not Rudesheim. I've forgotten the name of the newspaper. But anyway, the newspaper did a little piece on me as the bird diplomat. And after Frankfurt in 2016, this is the golden handshake from the State Department. They don't actually give you anything, but they do thank you for your 36 years of service. Kimberly and I immediately went to Australia, one of my absolute favorite places in the world. Here's a galah. Here's Kimberly taking a picture of a cassowary at a place called Cassowary House in northern Queensland. And we also went up for a week in Papua New Guinea. This is one of the famous mudmen from New Guinea. And the reason that we went there was to see a wattled plowbill. And the reason for this is that in 1986, I finished seeing all the bird families of the world, 159. Well, right now, you all know that the number of bird families is in the order of 250. So there have been almost 100 new families recognized. And some of the families I had seen earlier, for example, the sharpbill, which was one of my last families, is no longer considered a family. So they've added families, they've subtracted families, but the net result is a huge increase. So as soon as a new family is recognized, if I have not seen it, I immediately go and see it to keep my record clean of having seen all of the bird families. One of the things I really wanted to do, I had been seeing for about a quarter of a century this trip to the subantarctic islands of New Zealand. So again, immediately after retirement, we went to Australia and then to New Zealand. And this is a picture of Enderby Island. And look at that ship. That ship will come into the story a little bit later. This is the Komarov, Professor Komarov, I think. This is from Heritage Expositions. Wonderful birds in the subantarctic islands, including the endangered yellow-eyed penguin. This is a subantarctic snipe. Fortunately, amazingly, on our boat, we had Peter Harrison, who's one of the foremost experts on seabirds. So it was great dealing with him. One of the last days, we were actually chumming for albatrosses, throwing squid off the back of the boat. And these albatrosses were in a few feet away from us, fighting over the albatross. These are Buller's albatrosses. This is a photograph. This is not my photo. This is a picture from a guy named Lau Gwyn, who is one of the guides on the trip. And it just gives you an idea. This albatross is probably 8 feet from tip to tip of his wings. And you can see just the size of these enormous waves. It was really wonderful. Several people on the boat were injured. One of them had to be medically evacuated by helicopter. The weather was really remarkable. So another one of my bucket list places after retirement was the Galapagos. This is a marine iguana, a cactus finch from the Galapagos, greater man-of-war bird or frigate bird. This is a red-footed booby. One of the fun things about the Galapagos, and I'll see if we can zoom in on the eyeball here. You can actually see me and the others in the reflection of the eye of this bird. And it really, it's a wonderful place to to take photographs of birds. A place I had been to 4 times, but Kimberly had never been to, is Madagascar. And here's just I believe this is a black and white ruffed lemur. And this animal jumped onto Kimberly's head from the rear. So Kimberly had no idea. And all of a sudden, boom, this 10-pound mammal lands on top of her head. And she thinks it's the funniest thing that's happened to her all day. Another one of the great birds of Madagascar is the helmet vanga. And after Madagascar, I was contacted by a colleague in the U.S. Embassy in Bogota, Colombia. And I worked for about a year helping Colombia develop its international bird tourism, and had several visits down there and several meetings with the government of Colombia. And we had a sort of the climax of this effort was a parada diplomática, where I went around northern Colombia with a whole bunch of press, mostly Colombian press, but also some international people, to promote bird tourism in Colombia. It was a lot of fun. This is one of my favorite Colombian birds, largely because it's my wife's favorite. This is a booted racket-tail hummingbird. I love how his feet are white, so they don't mess up the white of the little tufts on his legs. You're sort of used to the fact that I can take crummy photographs. This is a very crummy photograph of a very important bird. This is the Puerto Rican parrot. It was bird number 9,000. In the evening, they come to a parrot breeding facility, and the wild parrots roost in the trees above the birds in the cages. And you couldn't enter the facility. So from a distance, I had to try to get a picture of the bird that was flying around in the evening at a long distance, hence the lousy photograph. In the last couple of years, I've spent a lot of time trying to work my way up to 10,000. The last bird was a Hokotoko antpeta. This is a violet purple coronet, glistening green tanager. These are all animals, birds from Ecuador. This is a photograph of my brother Hank doing some night birding in Ecuador. There's a grass green tanager from northern Peru. And 2019 was a milestone year for me. I started working for Rock Jumper International Birding Adventures. So I am now a part-time bird tour leader. And these are in the summer of 2019, they had a birding safari to Colombia. And they spent a week in Bogota and a week in Cali. And I think they had about 80 clients, and these are the guides. The women sitting below are sort of the organizers, and the guys standing above are mostly guides. So we break the group of 80 into smaller groups, and then each one would go out with a rock jumper guide and a local guide, and then they would divide up during the week to go to the different places at different times. It was a wonderful time. I've really enjoyed working for Rock Jumper. The last year, I told them I didn't want to do any tours because after COVID, so many of the full-time leaders had not had any work for a couple of years. So I wanted them to get to work. But I must say, I really missed not doing any tours this year. Next year, I'll do 2, and I'm down for 4 or 5 tours in 2025. So here, this is one of the groups. I went out with Adam Riley and 2 local guides in the Paramo south of Bogota. From there, I went directly from Bogota to Indonesia and got about 100 new birds in Indonesia. It was a great trip. This obviously is not a bird. This is a tarsier from the island of Siau, which is a critically endangered species. While I was in Siau, I did some scuba diving because the bird, there was only one potential lifer for me in Seattle, and I got it very quickly. And because of the ferry schedule, I had an extra day. And because I was traveling by ferry and not by airplane, I was able to go scuba diving the last day. This is a spine-cheeked anemone fish. And interesting thing, Sea Owl Island, a tiny island north of Sulawesi, is highly volcanic. And there's a big volcano right over the main city that's smoking all the time. And while I was underwater, you could hear the volcano. It was just sort of rumbling, constantly rumbling like distant thunder. And the guide, the dive master, this dive master does one trip a month. There's so few people there that dive. But he said that his last trip were a couple of Germans. They got underwater and started hearing the volcano, immediately came to the surface, got into the boat, and immediately left the island because they were afraid that the volcano was going to erupt. This is a photograph from Sulawesi, a green-backed kingfisher. Every once in a while, I get a nice photograph. And then this is early 2020. I'm leading a bird tour in southern India for rock jumper. Greater Racquetail Durango. I did 3 tours in a row: southern India, Sri Lanka, and northern India. This is Sri Lankan jungle fowl, yellow-browed bulbul from Sri Lanka. And I actually got a lifer on the trip. This is a Sri Lanka bay owl. This is our group in northern India. Beautiful scenery in the Himalayas. Red-naped ibis, a great bird, just in a city park in New Delhi. Now, this is sort of an interesting picture. Obviously, I'm on the left. The guy on the right is Ansar Khan, who is the son of Bolu Khan, who guided me and my brother Hank in 1982 in Bharatpur. And Ansar, Bolu's son, is now one of the top birding guides in India, especially in North India. The guy in the middle is Jayoti, who is a local guide from Ranthambore Tiger Reserve, where this photograph was taken. And one of the highlights of the North Indian bird tour is the ibis bill. And what has happened in the years since I looked for it in 1982, or 1982, is that the wintering grounds are known, and the bird winters not in the Tibetan Plateau, but in the rivers of northern India, right at the base of the Himalayas. So it's now a very, very easy bird to get. This photograph was taken, I don't know, about 100-yard walk from a major road and a bridge. One of the highlights of the tour were tigers. We had 11 tiger sightings. It was a tigers and birds tour that Rock Jumper puts together. We also had a nice view of a sloth bear. And here's my old buddy, the jungle babbler. So from India in 2020, at the end of 2020, after the main lockdown, Kimberly and I went to Kenya. This is a reticulated giraffe in northern Kenya. It's a golden weaver from the Kenya coast, secretary bird. One of the interesting things about traveling to East Africa in 2020 is that there were no tourists there at all. And all of the national parks were empty. You'd go and see a lion kill, and you'd be literally the only car there watching it. The people in the lodges and the parks were very, very thankful that we were there. And it was really very heartening. This is a secretary bird. And we did 2 trips to East Africa. One of them was a rock jumper tour that we did in the end of 2020, and then early 2021, we went to northern Tanzania because we had so much fun in Kenya that we thought we'd get another trip to East Africa while the lockdown was still affecting the tourist industry. The bird is the Usambara thrush. It had been recently split, and this is bird number 9,500. So this is 2021, and we're going to be 2024 soon. So it's about 3 years ago. Hank also came and we did a trip to Colombia, and we are celebrating. I don't drink beer, so my favorite celebration is ice cream. Later in 2022, I did a trip to Peru to see the split varieties of Rufus antpitta. There was a academic paper that was published that took 3 species of antpittas and turned them into 13. So there were 10 new antpittas. I had seen most of them, but there were 5 of them that I had not gotten. And so I put a trip together to do that. And part of this trip, I was with someone named Jesse Williamson, who wrote up an article that's in Outside Magazine. If you have any interest in it, it's a sort of a story about her experience bird watching with me in Peru at this time. Love antpittas since I discovered a new species of antpitta. This is a Rufus naped antpitta from northwestern Ecuador. It's an unusual race there. And in 2022, I was able to go and see my bird again. So this is a Cundinamarca antpitta, Grelleria kaestneri. And what had happened is during the COVID lockdown, a farmer decided to try to feed the Cundinamarca antpitta. And after 3 years of trying, he was finally successful. And the place where this bird was being fed was not too far from where I discovered it, and which is all now degraded. And in the last year, when I was down there, there was a local NGO, an environmental NGO, that was trying to save the area around it. And I came back and contacted the American Bird Conservancy, and they did some fundraising, and they have created a very substantial refuge around the Herrera's little farm. And so we now have a antpitta reserve that will help protect the Cundinamarca antpitta forever. So after that trip to Colombia, I ended up this is a year and a half ago now, spring, in northeastern India on a cleanup trip. This is the Indian rhinoceros, one of my favorite birds in the eastern Himalayas, the long-billed scimitar babbler, or slender-billed scimitar babbler. This is sort of an interesting story. I was taking some pictures along the side of the road, got back in the car and was eating some trail mix. I'm a little bit on the OCD side. When I eat trail mix, first I eat the M&Ms, and then I eat the peanuts, and then I eat the raisins. And as I was doing that, I had gotten through the last of the raisins, and there was one raisin, and I tried to get it in my mouth, and it didn't go in my mouth. And that's kind of odd. And I went and sort of bit it a second time, and it kind of was like it was sort of wedged under my wedding ring. Well, it turns out it was not a raisin. It was a terrestrial leech that had attached itself to my finger while I was taking photographs of some plants. And it looked all the world just like a raisin. It took me 3 times of trying to eat it before I realized that it was a leech, and I had to remove it some other way. All right, so after that trip to India, I did a trip with Kimberly. I've done several trips over the years where we've not been hardcore birding, and this is a boat trip from the Seychelles, where this photograph was taken, to Aldabra Atoll in western part of the Indian Ocean. And one of the nice things about the trip is it was billed as a scuba diving trip, and scuba diving is something that Kimberly and I love to do together. And along the way, there are 4 or 5 endemic birds in Aldabra that I needed to get. Interestingly, this is a blue Mauritius angelfish, which had just been discovered in the Seychelles, and we saw it at several different places in the atoll in the different islands around Aldabra. It turned out to be not an uncommon fish, even though it had only been very recently discovered as occurring in the Seychelles Islands. One of the great birds of Aldabra is the Aldabra white-throated rail. Weirdly, and I really have a hard time understanding this, this bird is considered conspecific, the same species as a white-throated rail that lives in Madagascar. The main difference between the two is that this bird is flightless and the bird in Madagascar can fly. And it's hard to imagine that a flightless bird would be the same species as a bird that can fly. But that's what they tell us. Another nice bird from Aldabra. This is a recently split bird from the sacred ibis of Africa. This is the Malagasy ibis. And this is one of the main reasons to go to Aldabra. This is the Aldabra Durango. It was not being very cooperative. Usually Durangos are easy to take pictures of, but this one was skulking in the middle of the bushes. This bird has the distinction of being on my life list, the shortest of any bird. I saw it in, I think it was June of 2022. And by August, the Abbott sunbird was lumped and I lost it. So it was it's now part of the Suimanga sunbird in Madagascar. All right, this was later that same year. So this was last summer, not this summer past, but the summer before. Kimberly and I were going to Svalbard, and I had decided that I really wanted to go to Svalbard largely because I wanted to clean up that gray blob on my eBird map because of the way the projection, even though Svalbard is a relatively small island, it looks really big on the map because of the Mercator projection. So it was bothering me. So I figured that we needed to go up there, even though there were no potential birds for me to see, but it's a beautiful place and they've got polar bears. And I decided to do it as inexpensively as I could because mainly, the main reason were the polar bears and filling in the map. So we got a short trip, a 1-week trip on a very large boat, and it was very, very reasonable. It turned out the boat had misbehaved, and they said it couldn't carry passengers anymore. So the company in England that had booked our trip said that they had a new boat that had never gone before. It was a maiden voyage, and they could get us a 10-day trip for the same price. And we had to pay a slight upgrade for the room that we were in because it was a really nice room. So anyway, it turns out this is the sister ship of the ship, the Professor Kamarov, that we went to the subantarctic islands of New Zealand. And in addition to that, we ended up in the exact same cabin, number 503, that we'd had in the 3-week trip to New Zealand in 2016. Amazing coincidence. Not a lot of bird life in Svalbard, but some very pretty things to see. We had wonderful views of polar bears. Boy, that's all for Svalbard. Okay. Last year, in just about a year ago, November, I had an opportunity to do 3 tours for Rock Jumper, 2 of them in Patagonia, and one was a 3-week cruise to Antarctica. So it was a great opportunity. Rock Jumper organized a entire ship, 160 some clients. So they had about a dozen guides on the trip, and I was one of the guides. And Kimberly went along. She loves boat trips, so she went along as a client. So before I went to Argentina, I went a little bit early and did a cleanup in northwestern Argentina, where this photograph is taken. Red-tailed comet is one of the birds I saw in northwestern Argentina. This is Orange Cyclodes. I love this picture. This is actually a vagrant Monte yellowfinch and a black crested finch. They look like they're sort of out for a stroll together. One of my main target birds was the South American painted snipe, and its elegant crested tinamou is always a favorite. So this is the group that I was leading down in Patagonia. This is one of the spectacular glaciers that we visited. Had a great time, and Kimberly, as you can see, she's the third from the left, was a client on this trip. So it was a lot of fun having her along. This is a picture taken at Ushuaia. This is a blackish Cyclodes and a white-bellied seed snipe, another one of my target birds down there, and a Chilean hawk. So this is from the trip to the Falkland Islands. The 3-week trip to Antarctica went to the Falkland Islands first, then to South Georgia, and then Antarctica. And this picture has not been photoshopped. This is just a bird standing on the beach, just a completely natural photo. This is also not photoshopped at all. We were visiting a shag colony, and Kimberly said, "Did you get any good pictures of those shags?" So I went down right next to the shags and took a picture facing up against the sky. And because I had to overexpose it so much to get the color of the birds, it completely washed out the sky in the background. This is a white bridled finch on the Falkland Islands. This is a picture from South Georgia. This is a yellow-billed duck. And this is the southernmost passerine bird in the world. This is the South Georgia pipit. And interestingly, the pipit was confined to a few small islets off of the main island of South Georgia because there were rats on the main island. And they were able to get rid of most of the rats. There were a couple of areas that were delineated by glaciers, and the area between the glaciers, they were able to get rid of all of the rats. And just through natural movements, the pipits came back and recolonized the main island. So they're really quite common now. And as we were in the boat, we happened to bump into Atlantic petrels. And it was interesting. We saw, I think, about 8 or 9 Atlantic petrels one day. I think we had 4 or 5 in one day. And a couple of guides who had been on this trip several times said they'd never seen more than 1 Atlantic petrel. So I think that the Atlantic petrels knew that I appreciated them and showed up for the trip. One of the nice things about having an entire boat full of birders is we did bird things. And there is a well-known emperor penguin colony near the Antarctic Peninsula. And normally you can't get there because the sea ice is so thick. But because of global warming, the sea ice was fairly open. And our captain was able to thread his way around the icebergs and go about 20 miles in a direction that normally a boat visiting at the Antarctic would never go. And we ended up seeing 24 emperor penguins, which is a real highlight of the trip. I had already seen them in 2002, so it wasn't a lifer for me. But I think I was the only one on the boat who had not seen it before. And we got the real nice views of Antarctic petrels. We had, I think, 2 sightings, and both times the birds sort of came zipping by and disappeared. But I was fortunate to be able to get a nice picture. So after the trip to Antarctica, I did another tour with Rock Jumper in Patagonia, and this one was specifically to see the hooded grebe, which is a critically endangered bird that lives in southern Argentina. So after that, so this is now March of this year, I went to Vietnam, a wonderful place. I got almost 50 lifers there in a month. This is a barred-bellied pitta. It's a blue pitta, a bird I'd actually seen before in Thailand, but really nice to see him in a feeding station. The collared laughing thrush, one of the Dalat endemics. There's a mountain range not too far from Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon that has a whole bunch of endemics, including this handsome bird. This is a red-winged laughing thrush, and this is a short-tailed parrotbill. We were with a group. I was with another tour company at this time, and the rest of the group decided to go off to lunch because they were hungry, and I couldn't imagine. We hadn't seen the parrotbill at that point, so I stayed back and missed lunch and looked for the parrotbill, and got a fantastic view of it, a nice picture. And fortunately, I was able to stake it out. And when the rest of the group came after lunch, we were able to go up to the same place, and we ended up seeing it. After the tour, I made arrangements with a local Vietnamese birder named Toby Trung to go up to a very remote area in northwestern Vietnam near the Chinese border to look for an extremely rare babbler. This is not it. This is the pale-throated wren babbler, which was in the same area. This is the bird we were looking for, the white-throated wren babbler, which has only been seen by a handful of birders. Let's see, after Vietnam, Kimberly came to visit me, and we did a couple of weeks in birding or not birding, but scuba diving in the Philippines. The main target was this animal, the dugong, which is related to the Florida manatee. And Kimberly loves manatees, so we went there to snorkel with that. Also had some very nice nudibranchs. And this is, again, in the Philippines. We saw the Philippines tarsier. So Kimberly and I were together, and then I did about a month trip in the Philippines to get ready for a rock jumper tour that I'm going to be leading this year in March in the Philippines. This is a purple-throated sunbird. This is an endemic Durango, the Tablas Durango. It's found on one tiny island in the Philippines. I now only need one more Durango, the Mayotte Durango, which is found on the island of Mayotte, which is a French island that is between the Comoros and Madagascar. So I need to go back there. After that trip, ended up back in Colombia with my brother Hank. Always a lot of fun birding with him. One of the sort of successes that I had was this bird, a thicket antpitta. We were birding in the Choco in western Colombia, and we heard this bird a lot. That we were in an area for 2 full days, and the first day we heard it, and the local guide, a very, very good guide, said it's almost impossible to see. You might get a glimpse of it, but he'd never had a single visiting birdwatcher get a photograph. I said, okay, well, we can change that. So I spent about an hour creeping around in the undergrowth, and eventually got the bird to come up and get a really nice picture of the thicket antpitta. After the trip with Hank, this August, I went to Sumatra, where I saw the Sumatran woodpecker. This is Schneider's pitta, a bird. I'd been to Sumatra twice when I was living in Malaysia, but I'd missed the Schneider's pitta on Mount Kerinci. They're now feeding it, so it's much easier. And this bird was from Java. This is the Javan blue-banded kingfisher, which was bird 9,901. And the reason that 9,901 is important is because this represents 90% of the birds of the world. And it was postulated some years ago that it would be impossible to see over 90% of the world's birds. And obviously with the fantastic advances in feeding birds and bird knowledge and local guides, 90% is doable, as I proved in August of this year. One of the things that we did on this trip was we went to the Maratus Mountains of southeastern Borneo to look for two very recently discovered birds. This is the Maratus white-eye and the Maratus blue flycatcher. Lousy pictures both. But really, really wonderful birds, and that they had just recently been discovered. Here's my brother Hank. He shows up all the time. This is a photograph from the end of October, just several weeks ago. And Hank has an idea that if you get a lucky stone, you see more birds. So this is a lucky stone. That's a stone that has a white band around it. And we had been looking in the middle of the day. It was blasting hot in Rondonia in western Brazil. You can see both of our shirts are soaking wet. It was just awful. And there were no birds calling at all. It was just completely dead. It was like 11:30 in the morning. And we were looking for a Rondonia warbling antbird. And I keep this lucky stone because it has two white bands on it. And one of them is for me, and one of them reminds me of my brother. So it's a constant reminder of my brother, even when we're not together, that I have this lucky stone that he so fervently believes in. So I turned to Hank and I said, Hank, I've got a lucky stone in my backpack. Let's get it out. So I got the lucky stone out, and Hank was holding it in his hand and rubbing it. And within a couple of minutes, a bird pops up on a brush pile that doesn't have any leaves. It's just, a big pile of sticks. And it's the Rondonia warbling antbird right out in the open, right in front of him. And we got fantastic looks at it, and poof, the bird disappeared. So this is a photograph showing the wonders of the lucky stone and pulling up the Rondonia warbling antbird. The next week we went to Acre and had some good birds there. This is a rufous twistwing. This is the Purus jacamar. This is an eastern striated puffbird. Chico's tyrannulet, which is a very recently described species. So that was my last overseas trip. So I told you before that my girlfriend's mothers used to make comparisons to a certain movie star. When I was in Indiana studying or training with the Afghans, at the end of our week-long training, we had a social dinner and we ate Afghan food and we're sitting on the floor. And because I'd spent so much time in India, I spoke Hindi. And strangely enough, a lot of Afghans understand Hindi. So even though I didn't speak their language, I was able to communicate with them in Hindi. So we had a wonderful time, and it was just had a wonderful experience with these guys and bonding over this meal. And one of the guys, as a way of complimenting me, turned and said, Peter, you look just like Hafez al-Assad. Now, this is a photograph that I took in Syria of Hafez al-Assad. He has his picture all over the roads. And this is a picture that I took from Afghanistan. So from 1978 to 2017, I went from Robert Redford, a Hollywood heartthrob, to a Syrian bloodthirsty dictator. I hope you have better luck in your birding. Anyway, thank you very much, and good birding.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Peter. Any questions, anybody? We did have some questions that were in the chat. Let me see if we can see them. Well, Delcy said, great presentation. And Alan asked, oh, did you see any good birds while stuck in Gander?
No, no birds. I did go birding every morning. We were there, I think 2.5 days, maybe 3 days. So every day I would go out and I was actually in a town called Lewisport, which is a couple of hours from Gander, because Gander filled up very, very quickly, and they had to put everybody somewhere. So we ended up in Lewisport, but it's a very scenic little town, and it has a small lake and a forest around it. I think I got a goshawk up there. That was probably the best bird, but the really amazing thing was just the warm welcome that we got from the people there. It was, I mean, I tear up just thinking about it.
So how many species do you think there are in the world?
That's a good question. I'm assuming that this question is really how many more birds are left to be discovered, because the number of birds in the world is 11,001. That number will change in January because the IOC checklist will be updated to version 14.1, and there will be some lumps and some splits. The net result for me should be about 15 increase in about 15 birds. But how many are out there to be discovered? It's really hard to say. There are not a lot of places that have not been checked out. One of the areas of new bird finding has been night birds, and there have been several night birds found, especially in Indonesia. Pam Rasmussen from Michigan State, who's now working for eBird, was involved in discovering several new species of owls in Indonesia. So, boy, it's really hard to say, because most of the birds that are becoming species are being split from other species. Truly new birds that are being found are pretty rare. These two birds in Maratus Mountains are a good example.
And Brendan asked, how long do you estimate it'll take to get to 10,000?
If any of you all are members of the American Birding Association, you will find out very soon, because I did an article for Birding Magazine that is coming out in January that will explain exactly what my plans are. So I don't want to be a spoiler, but let me just say that I am hoping to do it in the next 6 months.
Wow. Okay. And we've heard a lot about Santa Marta from some of our friends from Colombia. Is that a really special place?
Santa Marta is fabulous, and I have a special affection to Colombia. My eldest daughter was born there. I had a wonderful 2 years working there. I discovered a new species of bird there. I was working with the Colombian government to promote bird tourism there. So it is clearly a very special place for me. But Santa Marta has around 30 endemic species. It is the highest mountain that comes straight off of the ocean. So you go sort of straight up the ocean and right up to I don't know, 20-some thousand feet. And it's a wonderful place. The birding infrastructure is good, and the number of endemic species is fabulous. There are 3 of the 30 or so that are very hard to get. There's a recently rediscovered hummingbird in the southeast corner of the massif, and there are 2 very high altitude species, the blue-bearded helmet crest and the Santa Marta wren, which are only accessible from a trail that goes up from the southwest side of the mountain, and there's no road there. You have to walk. What did it take? It took a day and a half to get up, and then a day to come down.
What bird in particular do you still want to see?
Do I still want to see? Oh my goodness. I guess the main, if I had to say what my number one bird in the world that I have not seen, it's probably the Congo peacock. and it lives in the Congo, and I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Congo. I'd actually organized a trip to go see it, and unfortunately, on this bird bonanza tour that I showed you the photograph of the group, we were supposed to go look for it, and we had to fly into a tiny village in the Congo rainforest, and we had to borrow a guy's airplane. We couldn't rent a plane or anything, but I knew somebody that had a plane. He offered to take us there, and his pilot overflew this little village, and another plane had crashed in the middle of the dirt runway. And the plane was actually flipped upside down in the middle of the runway. So he couldn't land there. So we had to abandon that part of the tour.
Huh. Mary says she enjoyed hearing the travel stories behind the quest for birds. And somebody asked, what's your favorite bird?
Oh, my favorite bird has to be my bird, the Kundinamarca anpeta. I mean, sort of like, it's mine. It's sort of like my child.
That is Anna Mask. What was the most surprising bird that you saw?
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, so seeing a new species has got to be the ultimate surprise, I guess. Oh my goodness. Other surprises. Oh, an interesting bird. I was working in Papua New Guinea, 1983 to 84, 2 years, or 82 to 84, 2 years. And then 84, 85, I was working in the Solomon Islands because the Solomon Islands government had captured an American tuna boat, and I was sent there to negotiate the release of the tuna boat. And this happened very, very quickly because we didn't foresee that the tuna boat was going to be captured. So I was still working technically at the embassy in Port Moresby. So for the first 8 weeks, I would go to Honiara, Solomon Islands during the week. On the weekends, I would fly back to Port Moresby and finish the paperwork at my office in Port Moresby. And on one of those trips back and forth, the plane landed at a place called Kieta, which is on the island of Bougainville, which is in Papua New Guinea. And one day I decided to do some birding, and I was riding along in Bougainville, and I saw an albatross. Now, albatrosses are not found in the tropics, and there are no albatrosses around Bougainville. So the bird was flying very rapidly to the north. So I zoomed up in the car and got to a point where I could see in the ocean. And I saw the bird and saw it well. And I said, it's not an albatross, it's a booby. And it's a booby that looks like an albatross. And I could not identify it because I didn't know what booby looked like an albatross. And this is 1984. Well, it turns out there is a booby that breeds only on Christmas Island, which is an island off the northwest coast of Australia, called Abbott's booby. And one of the characteristics of Abbott's booby is it looks like an albatross. It has really long, skinny wings, and the jizz just presents itself. It looks just like an albatross. And I learned many years after I had seen that I'd actually seen an Abbott's booby, which is another bird that had never been seen in that part of the world before.
So were you following the footsteps of any famous listers?
Not really, no, because there's a tradition in British diplomacy of British diplomats that are interested in birds. There's several of them that are written. There's an old book of the birds of Korea that had been done by a British diplomat. There's an American diplomat. Gosh, what was his name? Started with a B, not Belton, who spent a long time in Brazil and wrote a book of Brazilian birds. So there is a tradition of sort of birding diplomats, but none of them were really sort of listers. They were more amateur ornithologists and did substantial work in publishing books on the areas that they knew best.
What about Phoebe?
Phoebe Snetzinger. Phoebe Snetzinger and I were almost soulmates. It was really very interesting. So much so that when she passed, her family asked me to write the foreword to her autobiography that was published posthumously. So if you see, it's a
Life list?
the book. I can't remember the name. I'm sorry.
Life list, isn't it?
Yeah. No, that was different. That was a biography, not her autobiography.
Okay.
But anyway, both are good books. But her autobiography, her family wanted me to do it because we had a connection. And the odd thing is, I'd only met her 2 or 3 times, very, very briefly, and I knew almost nothing about her, and had only spent a very short period of time. But we both had a sort of a mutual admiration society. She took her birding very seriously. She actually identified every bird that she saw. She did her homework and she knew the birds, even though she got most of her birds on bird tours. But she made sure that she knew what she was looking at and could identify the birds herself and didn't just take someone else's word for it.
Tammy points out the
Birding on borrowed time. That's it. Yeah.
Well, what would you recommend to younger birders? Is the diplomatic corps more dangerous today, or is that a thing to do today?
If yeah, well, certainly I I cannot imagine a better outcome for my life than what actually happened. Being a diplomat was a fantastic opportunity. It was an absolute honor to represent people like you and the others watching this, American citizens overseas, helping American citizens. We had a bunch of terrorist attacks in Egypt and it literally saved people's lives. One of my vice consuls was in Cairo when there was a bombing. He heard the bombing and ran to the bombing to see if there were any Americans hurt so he could help them. Again, I get emotional talking about things like this. It really is. It was an amazing honor to work with the people I worked with and have the opportunity to help American citizens overseas and to represent my country. It was fabulous. I would very, very strongly recommend it. Now, for me, it was a perfect fit because I am a crazy, totally dedicated lister, and I have dedicated my entire life to finding birds. So it was a perfect way for me. Another way to do it would be to become a business person and make a whole lot of money and sell your business for $5 or $6 million and spend the last 20 years of your life, paying people to show you birds. That's another way to do it. Maybe I can show you some birds as a tour leader. But anyway, yeah, no, it worked for me perfectly, and I just cannot imagine being. I was just so lucky and so blessed to have done it the way I did it.
And Brennan, who has a 14-year-old who's a fantastic birder, asks, what location that you've been to stands out for both birding and sightseeing?
Ooh, boy. Birding and sightseeing. In North America, I think my favorite place for birding, which is actually a pretty good place for sightseeing too, is Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
I love the Sky Islands of Arizona, which are the mountains, and the tops of the mountains are much more humid than the desert around them. So they're called Sky Islands. They have these little islands of vegetation of forest, and they're isolated, and they're very close to the Mexican border. So you get very interesting sort of Mexican type birds there, blue-throated hummingbird, painted redstart, red-faced warbler, Mexican spotted owl, Mexican whippoorwill. Really, really marvelous birds. And it's very comfortable birding because you're at an altitude, so the temperature is not as bad. You get some nice desert birds down in the lowland areas. It's very, very scenic, not too far from things like Grand Canyon and some of the Indian reservations. Really a very, very nice place. I have been there 3 times and really enjoyed it.
As a matter of fact, we had a talk on the Sky Islands just very recently that
Oh,
you all
good.
found on our YouTube channel.
Super.
All right. Well, we've kept you all long enough, and it's been really wonderful, Peter. Thank you so, so much.
Well, thank you all, and I hope that you get lots of people looking at your YouTube video.
I'm sure we will.
Alrighty. Take care.